And now we cross over to our Oh Soo-young for the global insight and an in-depth look at important developments in world affairs.
Thanks very much, Seung-jae. It is indeed time for global insight. Now, we can't live without water, that's a fact. 70% of the earth we live on is covered by it, and water also makes up 60% of our bodies. We consume water in an innumerable number of ways in our daily lives, yet 2 billion people worldwide do not have access to clean water, according to the World Health Organization. 1 in 3 lack access to safe drinking water, and 2 out of 5 people do not have a basic hand-washing facility with soap and water. What's more, we're running out of safe water, with water scarcity projected to rise in the decades to come. Now, World Water Day has been observed globally on March 22nd since 1993. And today on Global Insight, we will address the pressing need for fresh water in the world. And for this, we're joined by Kellyanne Naylor, Vice Chair of UN Water and Associate Director for Water, Sanitation and Hygiene at UNICEF. We also have joining us Claire Seaward, Global Campaigns Director of WaterAid, a leading NGO on water, sanitation and hygiene based in the UK. Very warm welcome to you both. And, well, let's start with you, Kellyanne, in New York. Now, the availability of water of the right quality, at the right time, and the place to meet environmental, economic and human needs. It all requires active water resources. Now, what does it mean for a country to be water poor or water stressed?
Great. Happy World Water Day, and it's a pleasure to be here. And I think when we look at this question, we can look both at the physical availability of water. We can look at whether or not we have enough water to meet the demand of the population from a resource perspective. But we can also see that it is related to economic water scarcity, which also means that water is available for people due to investment in the necessary infrastructure to make it available. And we need to bring these two elements together, the physical presence of water plus our availability to extract it, to be able to be water secure. But when we don't have those two factors, we become, as you said, water stressed. And this is a situation where there isn't enough water of sufficient quality to be able to meet the demands of people. And currently we estimate around 4 billion people, representing nearly 2/3 of the global population, experience water scarcity at least 1 month of the year.
Kellyanne, why is there such a scarcity of fresh water?
So you started off by saying that we live on a planet that is full of water. And indeed, that's true. But when we break it down, we know that only 3% of the world's water resource is actually fresh water. And of that 3%, 2% is stored in glaciers. And that leaves us with only 1% for our use. And of that 1%, roughly 70% actually goes to agriculture, leaving just 30% for industrial and domestic uses. So I think when you look at it, bringing the picture together, we actually have a very little amount of water that we need to use for many things that we hold dear to ourselves, both economic as well as the health and well-being of our populations. And that it's that multiple uses of water that makes this such a challenging issue, but also one of such critical importance for today's society.
Now, Claire, to bring you into the conversation, you've spoken about drug-resistant infections and how they're a silent killer of hundreds of thousands of people. Now, what are they exactly, and how do they spread through dirty water?
So antimicrobial resistance, which is the more technical term for this, is essentially when you have diseases such as sepsis, pneumonia, diarrhea, cholera, which are all being treated with antibiotics. And the more that is done, the more that people become resistant to it. Now, in a number of cases, those diseases can be transmitted through dirty water, but equally, hand washing is a critical way to combat that spread of disease. Now, that itself is really problematic in the sense that lots of people, as you said in your introduction, don't have access to the clean water and sanitation and hygiene that they need. And in fact, when you look at hospitals in particular, they're the 3rd biggest contributor to antimicrobial resistance. Now, in many parts of the world, they don't have the water, sanitation, hygiene they need in healthcare facilities. And in fact, 2 in 5 healthcare facilities around the world don't have facilities to wash hands. So what we have is a situation where dirty water is a transmitter, clean water and hygiene can help prevent it. But in healthcare facilities, we're actually seeing a real lack of that critical service. And that is something that as an international community and as governments around the world, we really need to come together to tackle.
And Claire, now your organisation for over 4 decades has been working to provide access to clean water and basic sanitation facilities to people around the world. Now, how critical are clean water and hygiene practices to global development?
It is a fundamental building block to how countries can grow and develop, and people can grow and develop. And you can look at it in several ways. One is that from a health perspective, as we've been talking about, and as has been in your news bulletins today, it's really about how do you keep people healthy. And good water, sanitation, hygiene has a real role to play in cutting things like pneumonia cases and cutting diarrhea cases. It's also a way to increase people's ability to engage in work. So good sanitation facilities in a business or in an employment situation can reduce absenteeism, it can increase productivity, and it can actually help improve gender equality. And finally, it's a really good return on investment. So we released some research last year that showed that if you invest in water, sanitation, hygiene services, you can get up to 21% return on that cost of investment in terms of benefit. So really, it's a fundamental building block in terms of how people grow and engage in the world and how economies and countries can grow and develop.
And Kellyanne, now, what is the importance of having access to clean water in the context of the Sustainable Development Goals that the world is working towards by the year 2030?
Yeah, I think we like to say that water is really the connector of all of the Sustainable Development Goals, and there are 17 of them. And when we look at how water is present, it's present both in health, when we look at SDG Target 1 and 2 on poverty and health and nutrition, gender equality, all of the different natural resources, life in oceans, life on land. So we really see that it's part of so many of those goals. But I think one thing we also recognize is that the success of the whole Sustainable Development Agenda is really going to depend on the success that we have with water. And while there's good news that over the past 20 years has been a time of tremendous progress where billions of people's lives have been transformed by having their human rights to water and sanitation fulfilled, and we see positive signs around the recognition of the importance of the management of water. The bad news is that we are still very much off track to reach this vital goal. And currently we know that around 2 billion people still lack access to safely managed drinking water, for example. So we're really going to have to speed up our progress, and we've estimated that we'll have to speed it up by a rate of around 4 times our current rate of progress to be able to achieve the targets that the world has set on water. And this is going to really require significant increase in the amount of resources that are being invested at the current rate.
And of course, the availability of safe water, the situation is all the more precarious for the particularly marginalised sectors of society, women and young children. Now, Claire, what role does clean water play for the human rights and the empowerment of young girls in particular?
If we're serious about girls' development and opportunity, then you absolutely have to be investing in water, sanitation and hygiene. When families don't have those services in the home, it's the girls and the women who are the ones who go off to collect the water and bring it back. That means that girls aren't in school. That means that women aren't at work. That means that they're missing opportunities. In South Asia, for example, 1 in 3 girls will miss some days at school because they don't have those facilities in the schools. And equally, in terms of maternal health, a number of infections can be directly attributed to a lack of those services in either the home or in the hospitals and lead to deaths. So actually what we're seeing is girls and women pay the price either through opportunity or sometimes even their lives. And so if we're going to really give opportunity and space, we really need to be investing in this.
And Kellyanne, well, it's really important that countries manage their water resources very carefully, but what are currently the biggest challenges that they face?
Great, thanks so much. Yeah, I think the challenges certainly abound in this area. And I think, one we've touched on already, that water is both a critical and a scarce resource. So this is kind of the first one, that it is scarce. And many countries actually don't have available data on the water resources that they have, because we know that water is also found, of course, in groundwater. And many countries don't have accurate estimates on their groundwater supplies or the rate at which groundwater is being extracted. And I think the other issue is of course, the quality of the resources. And as we see degradation, pollution, around almost 50% of wastewater is not treated before it's released into the environment, which brings pollution, ecosystem degradation, and also, of course, with changes in climate, we see sea level rise, which can bring fresh water. It can have saltwater intrusion. We can also see that as there's a rapid population growth and urbanization in certain areas, that the water infrastructure may be inadequate or non-existent to be able to deliver water to users. And I think, what we're seeing is that while we have this increasing demand, that this, alongside with changes in climate, many of which can be felt through water, through droughts, through different extreme weather events that can also damage water infrastructure, that this can also lead to conflict. And this is one of the areas that the United Nations is very concerned about, whether it's conflict at a community level between different water users, which could be herders, farmers, towns. It could even happen between states. Some of the conflicts that we've seen over water rights, for example, in the Western United States, or even between nations and transboundary waters. Right now, there's only 24 countries in the world that have reported that they have governance arrangements that monitor how they are sharing waters, rivers, lakes, and aquifers to be able to cooperate on the use of those water resources. So I think it's a real range of both kind of people-driven factors, the economy, but also politics and water policy that are the challenges that are facing many countries around the world.
And Kellyanne, well, in order to overcome these barriers, would there be any innovative tools or practices that could be used?
Yeah, I think we're seeing really exciting progress being made in terms of innovations and in terms of good examples, whether it's from a community level where we see, for example, examples where schools are bringing up innovative greywater treatment and reuse systems so that students are learning about how to be able to treat water and reuse it in a school setting. We see other kind of high-tech examples where countries, for example, an example I know about with Ethiopia, where they're using satellite data to be able to identify new sources of fresh water and to be able to drill to reach them more efficiently. We're also seeing groundwater monitoring, being able to, put in place more sustainable extraction methods in countries like, for example, Madagascar. And we have some examples in Bangladesh where an organization, UNICEF, has been engaging with partners in a managed aquifer recharge project to be able to look at how to take treated water and rainwater to be able to improve the storage for future use. So I think that these are just a few, and I think we're really excited to see both how countries and communities are coming up with innovative solutions that are meeting the needs of today, but also protecting the resource for tomorrow.
And of course, civic organisations and NGOs have been playing a big role in doing this. And well, Claire, what has your organisation WaterAid been doing to promote clean water and sanitation for people around the world?
So we work in 28 countries around the world, particularly in Africa and Asia and the Pacific and in parts of the Caribbean, Latin American Caribbean, and helping tens of millions of people either through working with communities and local organizations in terms of actually helping to provide those services. And in some cases, that includes things like healthcare facilities. We work a lot with governments to help them strengthen their governance and actually help put in place the kind of the monitoring and the management to make sure those wash systems are sustained going forward and they have the resources in place and the planning in place. And we also work with organizations across the world to think about how we can rally the level of resources and the skills needed to actually make the difference that we need to see at country level. So working with the UN, working with donor countries, working with institutions to see how we can actually make that progress that Kelly mentioned we really need to see if we're going to meet the Sustainable Development Goal on water.
Well, I'm afraid this is where we'll have to wrap up the interview. That was Kellyanne Naylor, Vice Chair of UN Water, and Claire Seaward, Global Campaigns Director of WaterAid. Thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you.